Hey guys, welcome back to this episode in which it's been a very, very long time because we accidentally skipped a week, which we still posted what we had. So go to our YouTube if you want to have some conversational good times. But we're back now, and we're gonna try and be back on our schedule. So yeah, Ashley, what's up with you over there, my pal?
First of all, I'll admit that it was partially my fault, and I'm just going to blame it on the ghosts because I was talking about some family ghost stories that my aunt had given me, and it was like as soon as I start talking about them, my camera shut off and the audio got all messed up and stuff. So it was like, all right,
You know what's
chill.
really odd? I didn't realize until you just brought it up just now that that is exactly when the audio cut out on your end, is when you started talking about your ghost stories. And then it
Yeah,
picked back up when you were done.
right.
That's weird. Why didn't I catch that? Ooh, ooh, I hate it.
But yeah, also I was in the hospital this week. As you can see by I don't know if you can even see it. It's red. It's red. I had to have an IV. It was traumatic. Um, but yeah, it was great. I'm out now. It wasn't for anything bad. It was for exploratory procedure, which determined that I do not have Crohn's disease. So, snaps
Woo!
for me.
Yeah, snaps for your health.
Also, I just want to say I woke up in the middle of the procedure and they were like, are you comfortable? You know, are you relaxed? I was like, yeah. They're like, okay. I was like, I'm awake though. And they're like, well, you're not going to remember this. I was like, okay. But I did remember it, and I was
Mm-hmm.
wide awake by the time I got back to my room. My sister went with me to drive me because you're not supposed to drive after that, and she was like, "Oh, you're still goofy loopy." I was like, "No, I'm was fully awake like 10 minutes ago."
Oh, God.
So it was
I hate that a lot. But that's what they say about gingers, right? Is that it takes extra.
extra poison to put us down.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I woke up in the middle of my procedure. It was fine. I've had other procedures where they were like, oh yeah, no, this isn't gonna hurt at all. We're not even gonna put you under that. We're like 10 times worse than this procedure that they totally knocked me out for, but it's fine.
Well,
It's
I'm
okay.
glad that you're feeling okay, because especially in Corona times, having to go to the hospital for any reason is like, ugh, God, seriously.
Right.
So, I'm glad you don't have Crohn's.
Yeah. I am too. So now I'm like one of the only people in my family that doesn't.
Snaps for you, man.
Yeah, snaps for me. I am the superior human specimen. I might be 5 feet tall, but I am superior. But yeah, that was my week. What did you do? Did you do anything fun?
No. But I did. Okay, so last week I had a little bit of an upset in that I went to Walmart and Target and there were no mini brands to be had. Now, today, I went to Target. They had the new series of mini brands out, and I had forgotten that after my upset last week, I had ordered some mini brands on Amazon because I was upset about not having Tiny Groceries open. So I got 2 mini brand balls at Target today, and then I had 4 more balls in my mailbox. So I figured, can we open one?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Okay. Spoiler alert, this series is much better than the last two. There's a lot more candy items, which I'm a big fan of. But we have, okay, so right off the bat, I just bit myself in the ass because I did get the icebreakers in my last one. However, they're pink and holographic, so I'm not mad about it. They're still cute. And then we have, is this, ooh, we've got Classico Alfredo. I do not have an Alfredo yet. And then the last little one, we got Velveeta cheese, baby. Okay,
To add to your Baby Bell collection.
yeah, I've got different cheese now. Okay, so we've got 2 big ones left. I've got Zataran's jambalaya rice. Is it rice? I don't really know what jambalaya is. I'm uncultured swine. But it looks like a rice product. And then I'm hoping this isn't like a register shopping cart in the last one.
Gold item, gold item,
Oh,
gold
well,
item, baby.
it's not a gold item, but it is diapers. I don't
Oh,
have diapers yet. So
Those are enjoyable because they're like squishy and it's the
yeah.
same like I don't know, like that same material that they use in like the actual diaper packages.
Hmm. Yeah, it is pleasant to squish. And it is off camera right now, but my mini brands jar is popping off. It's getting quite full, and maybe I'll put on our Instagram story what that is looking like right now, because it is getting fuller and fuller by the week. And I have that I'm saving for a day where maybe I'm feeling a little bit down in the dumps. I've got 2 more mini brands to open. These are series 1, so they must have been back stock items, but yeah, I
I
got
think
some
that they
Chupa
still
Chups.
make them.
Really?
I think they do. Like they have the series 1 and series 2 because I've seen them before too.
Okay, well, I got a 2-pack, so I probably won't have the self-control to hold on to these for too many days, but
It's going to take one bad customer interaction and you're going to be like, nope.
Yeah, exactly. Ooh, it's Ashley's story time.
Ashley's story time.
What are you talking about this week?
So my topic this week, we're going with an island theme, but like dark islands. And not the obvious ones either. Like we very easily could have done Island of the Dolls or whatever, you know, the weird, creepy doll island in Mexico. But I remembered a documentary I watched a while back because I'm lame. I watch documentaries. That's like my main form of entertainment. About leper colonies. So mine's about leprosy.
Sweet.
And leper colonies. So leprosy, we all know it. We all love it. Known as Hansen's disease, named after the doctor who discovered it. It's commonly found in the adorable rat of the desert, armadillos. Nowadays, it's the punchline of a lot of historical comedies. It's treatable with antibiotics. And in 2005, the World Health Organization effectively declared it eradicated. However, up until the 20th century, it was a vastly misunderstood disease running rampant through the unwashed masses, garnering a lot of stigma and prejudice towards those infected. While it is a mildly contagious disease, doctors understood that continuous contact with those infected would eventually result in an infection, so they ripped those infected away from their families and friends and sent them off to remote settlements known as leper colonies. So, leprosy, it's a debilitating disease. It's a chronic bacterial infection caused by the bacterium Mycobacterium leprae, a rod-shaped organism. Historians suggest leprosy was recognized as a disease as early as 600 BC, derived from various archaeological evidence, including remains and depictions. The disease can cause skin symptoms such as a large discolored lesion on the chest, discolored patches of skin, usually flat that may be numb and look faded, lighter than the skin around it, growths or nodules on the skin, thick, stiff, or dry skin, painless ulcers on the soles of the feet, painless swelling or lumps on the face or earlobes, loss of eyebrows or eyelashes. And those are just like the skin kind of exterior. Now, it can cause damage to nerves as well, including numbness of the affected areas or skin, muscle weakness or paralysis, especially in the hands and feet, and large nerves, especially those around the elbow and knee and in the sides of the neck. Eye problems that may lead to blindness when facial nerves are affected. Enlarged nerves below the skin and dark reddish skin patch overlying the nerves that is affected by the bacteria. Loss of feeling or sensation in affected areas. And it can also actually cause symptoms in the mucous membranes like a stuffy nose and nosebleeds. And if left untreated, the signs of advanced leprosy can include paralysis and crippling of hands and feet, shortening of toes and fingers due to reabsorption, where the body literally just sucks your limbs back into your body.
Wait, like it physically makes your fingers...
Yeah, they like reabsorb back into the body.
Ugh.
I'm not sure the science on that because I didn't dive too deep into that, but yeah, it just like reabsorbs. So that's why when you see like leper colonies nowadays, where there's still a lot in India where it's, maybe they don't have the resources to treat people, or the people don't have enough money to afford antibiotics, even though the antibiotics are cheap. Their hands kind of look like stubs.
Oh my god, I'm gonna have to Google this later.
Yeah. They also get chronic non-healing ulcers on the bottoms of the feet, blindness, loss of eyebrows, and nose disfigurement. And they can have other complications such as painful or tender nerves, redness and pain around the affected area, burning sensation in the skin. So leprosy is contagious, but again, it's mildly contagious. Infection from the disease usually occurs after long-term contact with an untreated individual with the disease, and we're talking on the scale of months to years. This isn't like you touch somebody with leprosy, you're going to die immediately. It's passed from person to person via droplets from the nose and mouth during close and frequent contact with an untreated individual. Historically, it was thought to be an STD or a symbol of sexual immorality, which is where some of the stigma behind it comes from. Eventually, science did catch up with leprosy, and in 1940 it became clear that it could be cured by inexpensive antibiotics, that most people, 95% to be exact, had natural immunity to it, and that the isolation laws that had been enacted to isolate all of the people infected with leprosy were barbaric, cruel, and incredibly detrimental to the patient's mental health. And around this time is when many countries began to abolish the quarantine policies enacted that kept the isolated from the general population. However, the U.S., being the U.S., took a bit longer to repeal the isolation laws, not until 1969. And while the article I found about it seems to think it was just because the U.S. was barbaric, like the governance was, after the past 2 years, I can maybe kind of see where they were coming from and why they might have waited to bring people out of the leper colonies. It also could have been that they just didn't believe in science, but...
Both of which are a very possible answer.
All of the above, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it's one of those things. I can imagine people with leprosy just being like, my rights!
So, for some reason, when we are, like, talking about leper colonies, my mind is immediately going to nudist colonies. So, like, in my mind, I'm picturing all these people with leprosy, but they're all naked on an island together.
I mean, they were usually sent to islands.
Probably wore clothes, though.
Yeah, I would say so. Maybe not much because, I mean, at some point your limbs do either reabsorb or kind of fall off because of lack of circulation and stuff.
Would that include someone's pee-pee?
Probably. Pretty much anything that's not your torso could fall off. But that's pretty close to your torso, so I think it comes from, like, that's why it hits your outer limbs first.
Mm-hmm.
So.
I'm definitely going to have to do some Googling on this later. I'm, like, very curious to see what all this looks like.
But yeah, so. Lepers. Don't have fingers, don't have toes. Some of them don't have limbs. There's a few, like, I was watching another documentary about lepers in India, because, again, it's really common there, and, like, some people were just torsos.
Damn.
So, yeah.
Okay, wait, there's this creator on TikTok, and I just want to shout him out. I don't know his handle, but I don't know if he was either born without limbs or if he was in some sort of accident, but he does his makeup by, like, with just his mouth and, like, sticking things against surfaces and, like, kind of using his shoulder to, like, get leverage. And he is so good at makeup. Like, half of us bitches with functioning hands and fingers and arms could not achieve the masterful makeup looks that this man is creating. Like, being just a torso is not... a
hindrance to your functionality.
Yeah. You can still be a very talented individual and not have fingers and arms and toes and legs. Proof being this fucking genius of a man doing the most spectacular makeup spectacular makeup looks with just his shoulder and some makeup brushes. So go off, dude. He's awesome.
We'll have to tag it in the description.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to find him because I'm seriously, like, so impressed by him.
But yeah, sometimes lepers are just torsos, much like that man. I doubt he probably has leprosy.
No. I think it was like a
a congenital
disorder. Exactly. Yeah.
So back to lepers. Before an effective treatment was found, the U.S. government sought to isolate the bacteria by quarantining the patients. Upon being diagnosed with leprosy, patients were immediately sent to one of several U.S. leper colonies, or leprosariums, where they were confined, immediately stripped of their fundamental civil liberties, such as working, seeing their families, voting, and raising their own families. In fact, if infected people bore a child, the child would immediately be removed and put up for adoption. Initially, these colonies were places that people were just kind of sent off to die, like they were just sent to fend for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
But because the people infected with leprosy didn't die as fast as some of the other diseases like cholera or tuberculosis, they realized that they would actually have to like go in and support these people, maybe offer some medical help, give them some occupational therapy or something as a treat. One of these colonies, located on the breathtaking peninsula of Kalaupapa on the Hawaiian island of Molokai, still has a small number of patients as of 2015 that reside there. So this particular colony, it was started in 1865 when the Legislative Assembly passed, and King Kamehameha the Fifth, which is his name.
Oh, it's Kamehameha. I actually know that.
Kamehameha.
Kamehameha, yeah.
How do you know that?
Because when we went to Hawaii, we did like this little historical driving tour thing.
Oh.
King Kamehameha.
So King Kamehameha the Fifth approved an act to prevent the spread of leprosy, which set apart a portion of the land on the Kalaupapa Peninsula to isolate the infected people. So the original colony was set up in 1866 by the legislature. And in 1893 to 1894, the Board of Health kicked out the last remaining fishing village inhabitants in order to expand the colony to encompass the entire peninsula, including the area of Kalawao. Originally, they just dropped some people there and, like, just left them to fend for themselves. And were like, they'll figure out how to farm and, like, build shelters and stuff.
Oh, my God.
Really, I think they were just dropping them off to die. But because they weren't dying and just, some of them were wreaking havoc, some of them were just depressed, they decided to offer some intervention and bring in some missionaries to help care for these people. So, in 1873, Father Damien, a Belgian Catholic missionary and future saint, jump-started an infrastructure project to help the leprous masses on the peninsula, and he immediately started construction on a hospital, a church, and a number of houses. He's really the one responsible for initiating the compassionate care program for the infected, rather than just leaving them to die on the beach.
Ugh.
Which, like, what... There's a movie I'm thinking of that's very specific where, like, they just go and sit on a beach and wait to die. I think it's Rogue One, where they just are, like, waiting to die and get blown up.
Yeah.
So his contributions to the compassionate care are the driving force behind future leprosy care and research, and so he's kind of the ultimate good guy of this story. However, after 16 years of uninhibited contact with the leprous masses, he became infected himself and was dying. This led another missionary, Brother Joseph Dutton, to show up in 1886. Now, Father Damien passed in 1889. He was buried in the churchyard of his beloved church in, Kalawao. However, the Belgian government was like, hey, we want our boy back. He was pretty important.
Yeah.
So they had him dug up in 1936 and sent back to Belgium. And then in 1995, they were going through his beatification process to make him a saint, and so they dug him back up, cut off his right hand, and sent his right hand back to Kalawao to be buried at his original gravesite because it was, like, so important to the leper colony. This has no real importance to this story, but it was just kind of an interesting tidbit, I thought.
Why? I wonder why that hand specifically, or was it just like, oh, this is the easiest thing to lob off and then just fucking send it back?
Well, like with the Catholic Church, I know there's in each church in the altar there are the bones or relics of saints. So that's why you hear so much about, like, oh, the 6 bones of John the Baptist's left foot are in this church, and the hair of Mother Teresa's in this church.
The Catholic Church is truly, like, just, what? I don't...
But it's like, no, I don't think any other churches do that. Like, you don't have to have
No. Like, let's just have this saint, but when they die, we're gonna dismember their body and send it all to all fucking corners of fucking hell. Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
That's, like, brutal. You would think, though, that would be, like, considered... Is it, I guess, in the Catholic Church bad to, like, dismember a dead body? Like...
I think it's no holds barred when it's like a real person of religious importance. So
the Catholics
there's
need
like,
to get
fuck
it together, man. I don't understand.
They really got to decide what. I
Yeah.
think the bigger problem is when because it's I think Jewish people, their faith is that they need to be buried whole. I think Catholic people, it's just that they can't be cremated because it's like the fires of hell or something. I don't know for sure because I'm not Catholic. Catholic churches scare me. My family's
Yeah.
Catholic. I don't fuck with it. Like, I've always been terrified of Catholic church. And I think that for people with religious trauma, especially Catholic religious trauma, that's like a unique experience where like all of us are just incredibly traumatized by the Catholic church. And anytime we
Right?
go in one, like my skin crawls.
I had one experience in a Catholic church. I did not grow up Catholic. I really didn't grow up with any sort of a religion. But for whatever reason, I was hanging out with a friend, and her mom's like, okay, but you guys have to go to this church group, and then you can
No.
keep hanging out. So I was like, okay, yeah, for sure. And it was like around Halloween time. And so we go into this Catholic church, and I'm just like tagging along to hang out with my buddy. And the pastor or preacher or father, what's his nuts, was at the front of the church in a room full of children, and there is a coffin in the church. And he just, all seriousness, looks at us all. One day, you're all going to die. And then goes on this like really gruesome tear about like how we're all going to die and be like committed to the ground. And then all of us were sitting there like, what the fuck? Still to this day, I don't know if the casket was empty or not. I don't think it was. I have a sneaking suspicion that there was probably a funeral service happening either like earlier that day or like the next day. And so the casket was just there. So then that wrapped up, and then we went to the little children's school portion of the church and got to eat Cheetos. But yeah, I 0 out of 10 do not recommend experiencing the Catholic Church. Sorry if you're Catholic and you're listening. I just don't understand. I don't understand you.
I think that like especially for small town Catholic churches where there's like a youth group or something. Well, really anytime there's a youth group involved, it's usually like some traumatizing. Like I know that the church that my parents go to now, it's not like, I don't know, it's very just like cut and dry. Like you go to church, you can go to Sunday school, but it's not like the traumatizing kind of Sunday school. It's just like, let's open our workbooks and go to this page and learn about, you know, the David and Goliath or something. Like it's super dry. It's not as scary or traumatizing.
I did for a very brief period of time. My family went to church. I think we stopped going when I was like in 3rd or 4th grade. And I feel like the only reason we ever went was for like a keeping up appearances sort of thing. But anyway, there was a group called Wednesday's Kids. And our church was pretty chill. We would go to Wednesday's Kids for like 2 hours on Wednesday. They would like read a passage of the Bible to us, and they'd be like, okay, guys, go play. And we would all play in the church basement, and they'd feed us Jello jigglers. So I don't remember anything about the actual teachings of Christ. However, I do remember distinctly I ate a lot of jigglers at Wednesday's Kids, and we played a lot of hide and seek in a creepy church basement. So I 10 out of 10 recommend Wednesday's Kids if you're still a thing, because that was a good time.
I think I have a few traumatizing stories about my church experience. I think the most distinctive one is when a family member who I will not name nor insinuate who they are, I was talking to them about heaven. And so my parents were not married when they had me, which, you know what, modern family, who gives a shit? And this family member told me that I would not be going to heaven because I was a bastard child and I was not baptized in the Catholic Church. I did not have a christening. And this, of course, was the 90s, so it was still very, like, ass backwards. I have since forgiven this family member. I don't care. I think they've changed a lot, so it's something that I can kind of move on and forgive. Another traumatizing experience that I have was actually not a Catholic church, but it was when, for a short period, we went to, like, some sort of Protestant. It was just generic Protestant church, and mostly it was fine. But we had a female pastor And she she had a night where she's like, okay, all the teens need to come to the church and stay at the church and spend the night, and we're gonna have real talk here, like a sleepover. And so she proceeded to she didn't split us up. It was a small church, so there was 2 boys and 2 girls. And and also, mind you, I was like, I think 11. Like, I was not really a teen, but I was old enough that I fit into that group. And I was pretty mature, so they're like, you can come. She proceeded to give us like a 2 hour long chat on birth control, and she was telling us about like the horrors of her birth stories, and was like, abstinence is the only 100% effective way to not have children. And, even then, like, the Virgin Mary is an example of why you shouldn't have impure thoughts. Like, it was weird because it was like, I was like, aren't you Team Virgin Mary? Like, she's like, or I can't remember. It was something weird with like the Virgin Mary, and it was like, even with that, you could still get pregnant. It was definitely like trying to scare straight.
Mm.
And I just remember sitting there and thinking, this is wildly inappropriate. There should at least be another adult here.
Right.
And then she's like, okay, let's go play hide and seek. And then I was like, because I like spent a lot of time just like meandering around the church. So I went and hid somewhere like very specific, and no one came for me until like they
dodge the rest of those conversations for their evening.
Yeah. It was very uncomfy. And the other kids, like, I don't know, like nobody wanted to be there, and nobody, I mean, we got along fine, but it was like, it wasn't like we were all friends or, we're super friendly. Yeah. We didn't go to the same schools, and it was like, I was like 11, and then like the oldest was like 18.
Oh, that's like, weird. Yeah,
yeah.
I know, like, as an adult, that's big of an age gap, like 6 or 7 years is not that big of a deal, but as a teen,
yeah,
18-year-olds and 11-year-olds should not be talking about the same.
Well, and boys and girls, and it's like, I understand like having like a health class or something where everybody's the same age, but it's like, you're talking to a child who is not, definitely not, like, and then you're talking to a teen who may or may not, who's an adult technically, but
there's different conversations that need to happen there.
Yeah. And it was also like kind of a meandering thing. It was like she went back and forth. She was like, yeah, so and she was married when she had her kids, and she's like, so I was on the birth control sponge and I got pregnant, and I was on the pill and I got pregnant, and I was using condoms and birth control and I was pregnant. And I'm like, sounds like maybe you don't know how this works.
Right. It sounds like maybe you're using that incorrectly, Karen.
Right. I'm like, that doesn't seem like this should be that hard for you. No. But of course, they were all miracles.
Yeah, that's, of course. She definitely wanted each and every one of those children.
Yeah. I think that it was one of those things where maybe she was like poking holes so that she could have more kids, and her husband was like, so this was just a narrative that she had spun herself into, but really it was like she wanted more kids.
That's fucking psychotic.
Yeah. She was nice and she tried, but she was definitely like not the person that should be mentoring teens.
No.
So anyways, off the Catholic Church, back to lepers. So eventually the Hawaii Board of Health began relocating all of the infected patients from around the peninsula. They kind of gathered them up and put them on the western coast of the peninsula because they decided the climate was warmer and drier and the access by sea was easier, so they could just bring people in on boats. And that is how the Kalawao location came to be. The government eventually built a full-blown research hospital in Kalawao dedicated to leprosy, and from 1909 to 1913, the U.S. Leprosy Investigation Station, which is a fun name, was headquartered there. So life for the infected patients on the Kalaupapa colony was a conflicting existence. On one hand, they had just been ripped from their families and lives and sent to live on the treacherous sea cliffs, where mortality for the disease was high, especially at the beginning. On the other hand, they lived in a beautiful locale where the patients lived a relaxed, peaceful existence, in attending church dances, lei-making contests, musical performances, and softball games. Patients, healthcare workers, and staff all came together to create some semblance of a family, especially because some of the patients were children and had been effectively abandoned by their families.
That's sad.
Yeah. And I mean, to be abandoned by your family to any degree, but then like something that you can't control and something that they may have given you or exposed you to, Like, that's heartbreaking. Some patients found love. Nearly 1,000 couples were married between 1900 and 1930 alone, and eventually some of them even had children, although the children, like I said before, were immediately stripped of them and adopted out to nice Catholic families, which is a trend in the Catholic Church. Again,
Yeah.
boo. So patients' families were allowed to visit if they wanted to, but they were boarded at separate quarters, and they were only allowed to communicate through a chicken wire screen, which would not have actually prevented the spread of leprosy because
No.
it's water droplets. So just let them give them a hug, like, as long as they're not around them 24/7. One longtime patient, Olivia Robello Braitha, said in her 1988 autobiography, "They catch you like a crook and you don't have any rights at all. They didn't care about ruining a life, it was just a number." Many families, like I said, had just abandoned their members over the fear and the stigma of the disease, or maybe the social implications behind having a child or a family member with leprosy. And in fact, the government didn't really help that because the laws of the time declared that people sent to the leper colony, they were guaranteed a home, but for life. They had to stay there forever. Because at that time, they had no cure. There was no known cure. They didn't really care. They just wanted to keep them away from the gen pop. Local doctor Sylvia Haven stated in 1971, "For some, home for life translated more closely to a prison, however picturesque it might be." Sister Alicia Damon Lau, who came to the island in 1965, stated, "You were brought here to die. You weren't allowed to leave the island." Kalaupapa was one of several U.S. leper colonies. Among them were the tiny Pekingese island on Buzzards Bay off the coast of Massachusetts and the Carville National Leprosarium, set up in former slave cabins in a malaria-infested area of Louisiana. However, with almost 8,000 patients over about 150 years, Kalaupapa was by far the largest colony. Eventually, the government policy caught up with science and formally allowed patients to leave and rejoin their families, allowed them to vote, regain their lives, even though individual colonies had been relaxing restrictions since the original cure of malaria. But patients weren't actually free to leave Kalaupapa until 1969, as declared by the king at the time. However, many chose to stay because they didn't have, like, their birth families had either died, they didn't really know them, they had their chosen family on the island, so they just decided to stay. The only buildings now remaining on the colony site at Kalawao are the two churches, Solama Congregationalist Church, established in 1866, and the St. Philomena Catholic Church, which of course was Father Damien's church, where his right hand is buried in the churchyard. And near the two churches is Judd Park, which is a picnic site with a picturesque view of the North Shore of Molokai. But that pretty much ties up my story. Just that the U.S. government has always treated people that have diseases like shit, but sometimes for good reason and sometimes not.
I would be so pissed if I had leprosy and instead of sending me to the island in Hawaii, they would send me to the one in Louisiana.
Which they probably would.
Yeah, my luck, yeah, for sure.
Because I think it was everybody, like, on the West Coast got sent to the one in Hawaii, and then it was, like, people, they kind of divided it up.
Mm-hmm.
The one because I was reading a little bit about that one was even worse. Like, the Hawaii one, like, yeah, it was really shitty that they were tearing up their families and sending them there. But at the same time, it was like, you're on this beautiful island. Mm-hmm. But again, this little chunk of land that you have is part of, like, an indigenous culture's home that they were kicked off of. However, that kind of had the added benefit of now it's preserved. So, like, when you go there, it's what Hawaii was before,
colonizers.
Before the colonizers. So it's one of those things where it's like, was it better or worse to put the leper colony there? Because, yeah, like, you kicked the original fishermen off, but now you have this little slice of preserved land. And when the last people die, last lepers living die, because they're all cured, they just live there because they don't want to leave. There, I think, is a lot of like, argument over what's going to happen to that land. I think it's declared a national park, but developers are, like, desperately trying to get their hands on it.
No.
Yeah. So it's just like that. I think the whole peninsula is. But It's an interesting story.
Mm-hmm. I
So
really hope that developers don't come in and just put a bunch of high-rise condos on that land.
I think that that's like what they want to do is like
Mm-hmm.
just because some people are like just leave it a park, leave it as it is.
Right,
It's
yeah. Leave it, or like maybe allow some of the native population a chance to purchase a piece of land, because like the price to like buy any land there
is insane.
outrageous, and it prices out anyone that's not like a wealthy white person that wants to come build a vacation home essentially. So like
Yeah.
maybe, just maybe, we can like let the native population just have that land back and just like decide what to do with it instead of auctioning it off to development companies. But
Well, and I don't know if you've seen the TikTok where it's like this guy who he's Hawaiian, like that's his ethnicity, and he's like people keep saying, "Oh, well, all of these hotels and stuff are bringing commerce to the island." He's like, "No, you are literally just destroying the paradise
mm-hmm,
because and whitewashing it and colonizing it. Like, just leave.
mm-hmm.
We will find other things to work. Like, we'll
Right.
find other things
Well,
to do."
they were a independent functioning society before white people came in. Like,
Right.
we aren't needed there. And like what we've done basically, like even their agriculture at this point, I don't know how accurate this is, but apparently like white people came in and just like planted all these like pineapple and sugarcane crops, and it like basically has made the land infertile for like the native plants that used to grow there. So
Mm-hmm.
we've like destroyed their agricultural economy, replaced it with this like bastardized version of their culture, and now we're
Right.
like trying to be like, oh, well, we're the saviors of this island because you get all this tourism money. No, like, yes, it is a beautiful place, and I have visited, and I love it there, but I'm not going to pretend like the version of Hawaii that I saw was like the version that's supposed to still be there.
Right. Well, and it's also like I feel like white people just take in whatever island
Mm-hmm.
culture that they want, and they're
Yeah.
like, ah, yes, pina coladas, they're Hawaiian. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
no, that's not even remotely a Hawaiian thing. Like, you're
No.
taking coconuts, you're taking pineapples over there, which aren't those like more indigenous to like the tropical, I mean, like southern tropical islands.
I'm not entirely sure. And they very well could have grown in Hawaii like prior to
Yeah,
being
but not to that
colonized.
degree.
But yeah, not in like apparently the Dole plantation is like a big thing to go visit. Um,
Mm-hmm.
we did not visit it because I have no interest in visiting farms. I lived on a farm, but apparently they just have like overplanted, and so now it's just like I don't know. It's like basically a plantation as you would see in the South, but for pineapples. It's kind of like the
Right.
same gist. So it's like, are we really? Why are we celebrating this? But
Well, and the other thing is, like, I thought that the whole Hawaiian Island thing was that, like, the land was so fertile because of the volcanic eruptions that had happened.
yeah, probably
And,
so.
like, they're probably stripping just, like, that whole top layer off. So, unless there's another volcanic eruption,
Mm-hmm.
it's not gonna it's not gonna come back.
Yeah.
And so then you're bringing in chemicals, and it's like, it's islands. So those chemicals are gonna run off into the ocean. And
Mm-hmm.
that's just contributing to a lot of problems. So,
Yep.
like, I don't know. Like, I feel like Hawaii is a beautiful place. I don't know that I need to go.
Yeah, it's tricky because especially right now too, they're having a water crisis in which the government is telling the natives, the people that live there, to ration their water use so that the people coming
At the
to stay at the
resorts.
resorts, yeah, can take a long shower. Like it's absurd what we've done to those islands. And God, it sucks because I really do love it there, but like at the same time I don't want to contribute to like
Right.
ruining their culture. So it's like one of those things where I want to go visit. And there's definitely things you can visit, and you can do things like there's a few different I saw some girl on TikTok talk about this. She's like, you can visit there, but like don't participate in the things that are destroying. Like don't go to the Dole plantation. Go to this place instead where you can volunteer and learn about the native fauna and like help clean up the ocean
Mm-hmm.
a bit, or like don't fucking touch the turtles. Guys, don't touch the turtles. Like
Don't touch any sea
yeah,
life.
I don't care where you are. Don't fuck with the native animals because A, it's either really unhealthy for them, or B, it's going to end up really unhealthy for you. We were in Colorado recently, and these fucking ding-dong tourists, there was a large moose on the side of the road, and my family was common sense. They're like, you know what? We're going to keep driving slowly in case it comes out in the road, but we're going to just keep driving. We'll see it from the car. That's great. But these other tourists were fucking ding-dongs, park the car on the side of the road, get out. They're like 10 meters from a fucking moose. Do you know how fast that thing can just like come over and smush you like a fucking pancake, you ding-dongs?
Well, especially if it's like any sort of mating season for them, or if it's a bull moose or like what, like it will trample you. It will kick you in the head and will kill you.
Yeah. You know what would be great to see is like before any sort of travel, if people required you to take like a cultural appreciation course on wherever you're visiting so that you know, like, don't do this, don't touch that. This is the proper way to act when you go to these places. I would love to see that. I would fully participate in that.
Well, I mean, I feel like sensible people do research, so you're not like doing something that is going to either incite a riot in the locals or fuck with the fauna. But it's like you see tourists like picking up baby dolphins and killing them, or
well, and even things as small as like, again, in Hawaii in particular, there's certain sorts of sunscreen that you shouldn't wear into the water because it'll damage the coral reefs. But you see those fucking ding-dong tourists on the beach with their aerosol sunscreens. It's like, guys, it's like posted very clearly in a lot of places not to use that. And you just have to be like conscious of what you're doing and how you're contributing to the place that you're visiting, and just people don't have any concept of that. And I think a lot of it comes down to like there are decent humans that can visit a place and not be assholes about it, and then unfortunately society, half the population are fucking idiots.
right.
And unfortunately, a lot of fucking idiots have money and can go do stuff. So Devin's story time. Ooh.
What are you gonna talk about?
This week, as Ashley mentioned, it is an island-themed episode, and honestly, it's pretty fitting because Ashley has her like Survivor-esque headband on. I'm really into that. But this isn't a fun tropical island. Today, I'm going to talk about Stalin's Cannibal Island. So, yes, we love a little cannibalism. Well, we don't like cannibalism, but the stories are like gruesome and fascinating, and that's where the love comes from. It's not that we're like wanting to be cannibals or like worshiping cannibals. It's just like gruesome and fascinating, and that's hard stop purely what it is, I think. So anyways, I'm sure we all know like a good amount of dictators. We've got like Hitler, Castro, Putin. Come at me, Russia. I don't give a shit. But for some reason, and I don't know if this was just my school, we like didn't really talk about Stalin, which is mind-boggling because he was like pretty fucking terrible, and I didn't have any idea until I really started. Like, I knew he was bad dude. Like, obviously he was a dictator and he was like very mean man. I had no idea how bad he was until I started researching this, and he actually was responsible for even more deaths and genocide than Hitler was. Even Hitler didn't like this guy. That's how fucking bad he was.
And we were on his side at one point.
Yeah, we fought alongside him during World War II, which is just like, why did we do that? Anyways, so for those like uneducated swine out there like myself, I'm going to give you like a little history lesson about Jojo Stalin, or as I will now be referring to him as Jojo Little Dick Stinky Stalin. So Jojo Little Dick, he became the leader of the Soviet Union after the founder of the Soviet Union, Vladimir Lenin, died in 1924. So Stalin, he ends up ruling the Soviet Union until his death in 1953. And he was known as like a very brutal leader and was responsible for the deaths of over 20 million people. So like I mentioned, he's like super brutal, probably one of the worst in world history, maybe second to like the Mongols, or what was his name? Genghis Khan. Anyway.
I don't know. Maybe.
Yeah, I don't know. I also know shit all about Genghis Khan. I just know that, you know, the Mongols did a lot of raping and pillaging in their time, so.
That's true.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll give you that one.
So basically, Stalin, he would have anyone that didn't agree with him killed. So he would actually intentionally cause famines in areas of the country so that people that he wanted to starve to death would starve to death. And so throughout his rule, he would actually order purges where like millions of people he thought were against him would be killed or put into slave labor camps.
Okay,
And
wait.
yeah,
Are you going to talk about the Photoshop?
the Photoshop.
Did you not see about the Photoshop?
I saw the very handsome picture of Stalin as a young man, but I don't know
No, no,
about the
no.
Photoshop.
Joseph Stalin, whenever he would have someone killed, he would just have them like edited out of photos. So he would like, he was like the originator of Photoshop. He would like have it like, and this was hard back then because it was
Uh-huh.
what like the 40s and the 50s. He would like have them artfully painted over or like just straight up cut out.
I had no idea. What a
Yeah, no,
petty
because
savage.
but he would just like pretend like they never existed. So like especially like council members and stuff, he would just cut them out.
Oh my god. Petty. Jesus. So I had no idea about that. So fun fact of the day, you guys. So historians though, they're like really not sure exactly how many people he killed. They estimate he was responsible for between 20 and 40 million. We don't know the exact number. So at the start of World War II, Stalin, he of course formed an alliance with Adolf Hitler because obviously like shitty people stick together. However, Stalin sucked so bad that even Hitler hated him, so then Hitler backstabs him and makes a surprise attack on the Soviet Union, which is when the Soviet Union decides, you know what, maybe we'll team up with America. We'll become part of the Allies, and so, from there it's history. Allies win the World War, blah, blah, blah. And Soviet Union basically gets off scot-free for all the atrocities that they're taking part in because they essentially aided in liberating, the camps in Germany and because of, Hitler's shitty attitude. So after World War II, Stalin, he ends up setting up basically like puppet governments in these other Eastern European countries that the Allies had, quote unquote, freed from Germany. And so these governments are actually run by the Soviet Union, aka Stinky Stalin was in control basically of all these Eastern European countries. This actually is what kicks the Cold War off between the two superpowers in the world at the time, the Soviet Union and the United States. So, anyway, now that we have like all the bullet points in the background on this dude, we can kind of get into our meat and potatoes here. One of Stalin's many horror shows, Nazino Island, aka Cannibal Island. So this actually takes place before World War II. So the year is 1929, and Stalin, he's sitting in his dictator's chambers, like contemplating the troublingly small size of his pee-pee, like plotting the next disastrous deed that he has. And so it's during this time that he comes up with an idea that he calls collectivization. Basically, and this is like the act of him rounding up all the poor people from their farmland in areas like the Ukraine and those areas of like puppet governments. So he would round up these peasants essentially and then send them to work on Soviet collective farms so that he could then have control of their land, and then he would also be like producing food for the Soviet Union, whatever. So, like I said, basically he's sending them to work camps and stealing their land. So one thing leads to another. Stalin is like casually murdering anyone who opposes him in the endeavor, and eventually this unfortunate string of events lands him in a situation where the folks in the Ukraine are like, fuck this guy. I would literally rather burn it all to the ground than let him take our land. So there's this massive movement of people that are literally, the peasant farmers would just like burn their tools, slaughter all their livestock, destroy their own property so that their land would become useless to the Soviets. Of course, this leads to them being rounded up and taking over to those collective camps. So Stalin, at this point, he does what he did best and has everyone that opposed him basically shot, and then shoves everyone else into the gulags, which are basically like really like forced labor camps is what a gulag is essentially.
Mm-hmm.
But they're like super brutal. They have a notorious representation, a notorious what's the
Reputation.
word? Reputation. Thank you. So because of this, because of the farmers burning their land, destroying their tools, then Stalin, as an act of revenge, basically, against these people, has them killed. Anyone that he doesn't have killed or sent off to those camps. And so by 1932, this movement had led to famine across the USSR and a gulag system that was literally so overcrowded that Stalin is like begging someone to come in and solve this problem for him. He needed someone creative, someone that would think outside of the box. So someone with an evil idea so good that no dictator could resist. This man was Genrikh Yagoda. This dude is mostly famous for being one of many dudes that Stalin promoted to like the top of his ranks, and then he gets bored with him and just shoots him in the head. I should also note that this man had a Hitler mustache before Hitler had a Hitler mustache, so really, he's like setting the trend for evil men's facial grooming. Genrikh is a trendsetter.
I bet he got photoshopped out too.
I bet he did get photoshopped out because he definitely got offed by Stalin once Stalin was, bored of him. So anyway, Genrikh, he had come up with an idea that was like, essentially, we're going to round up all the people who were dissident of Stalin's regime. And instead of sending them to the gulags, we're going to relocate them to this land in Siberia where they're going to be forced to farm so that they can provide food for the rest of the USSR. And on top of, being forced into labor, the miserable weather in Siberia would just like be punishment on top of this forced labor, which...
Yeah, I'm not an agrologist, but like...
Not
Siberia seems like maybe not the best place. Like,
right.
Southern Russia, maybe,
Well, and like, as we get into the story here, you're going to be like, it is May. The weather is still icy and snowy. Why did they think that this was a good place to farm? Especially like en masse to produce food for the entire Soviet Union.
Right.
I think really this was just their way of like, we're going to punish you guys and then punish you even further when you're not able to produce what we need. But anyway... So, Stalin's like, yes, Genrikh, that sounds great. He gets the green light to do this. So, anyway, essentially to populate these camps, what was happening was that Genrikh, he was taking it so seriously, he's like handing out quotas to local law enforcement officials to meet when it comes to arresting people to send to the farms in Siberia. So, like, in Stalin's regime, if you were given a quota to fill and you didn't fill said quota, you'd basically become part of someone else's quota. So, dissidents were being arrested in areas where they didn't exist, basically. So, a lot of the time, what would end up happening is, at the time, the Soviet Union had what was an internal passport system. And if you're familiar with the movie Anastasia at all, basically, it's like, you cannot go anywhere within the USSR without having your passport on you. It's essentially like an identification card, and it's illegal not to have it on you. So what would happen is people would like basically leave the house without their wallet is kind of, the idea here. They would get arrested, and then they would end up on a train sent to the fucking depths of Siberia for this. So these prisoners...
Which is like... I forget my wallet on like a weekly basis.
Right.
So like I'd definitely be there.
Yeah, it's very, very similar to like well, I can't remember what I was just going to say, but essentially, yeah, imagine you forget your wallet and then you're out at the farmer's market. Someone comes to asks you for your identification and you don't have it. So you get sent to the fucking gulag. Like, this is what's happening here. So these prisoners, they're snatched off the streets. Not many even getting a chance to say goodbye to their families or to ever let them know what had happened to them. They would just disappear one day and then they'd get sent to board this train to the fucking brutal interior of Russia, not knowing what they were coming up on. And much like the victims of the Holocaust, the trains that they boarded were so brutal and the trip was so long that many of these people didn't even survive the initial trip. And honestly, I'm going to consider them the lucky ones here because they were literally being sent to hell on earth. Like, it's sad that they died, but honestly, like, they didn't want to be there anyway. They were going to die eventually, and just, this was the easy way to go.
Yeah, like they were the lucky ones.
Yeah, they didn't have to endure what was coming. So these trains that they had boarded, they were heading for a city called Tomsk. So unfortunately, in all of his excitement, Stalin and Yagoda, they failed to let any of the officials in the city of Tomsk know that trains literally of tens of thousands of political prisoners were being sent their way. And so upon their arrival in the city, Tomsk is like, excuse me, what the fuck am I supposed to do with 90,000 prisoners? Were you supposed to have set up some sort of like prison camp system? We don't have the resources for this. Very much giving me Firefest vibes. All these people show up. There is nothing there.
There is a slice of cheese on a piece of bread.
And we're in Siberia, so the resources already limited. So in May of 1933, after a couple months of housing all of these people basically in tent encampments outside the city, the officials in Tomsk were like, finally, we got to figure this shit out. So what they end up doing, they start loading up prisoners. The first batch of prisoners, I guess you could say, there's about 5,000 of them. And then they loaded 50 guards onto lumber barges. And they're like, well, we're going to send them down the river to this little island. They can't, get off the island. It'll be like a little prison camp, and then they can just farm and do whatever there, and they're just not our problem anymore.
Kind of like the leper colonies.
Kind of like the leper colonies.
Go to the fucking island. We don't care what you do there.
Exactly. So their ride there, again, like the trains, it was rough. So it's nearly 500 miles. They're traveling by barge in overcrowded conditions. And it is May. It is early May, and the river is still chock full of ice. They're in a region of Siberia that is still being ravaged by snowstorms. And so by the time the barges finally make it to what would become known as Cannibal Island, 27 passengers had already died just purely from exposure. So the island that they finally land on is fucking bleak. So it's located in a low-lying marshland, so like right off the bat, it's not going to be an ideal place for building a settlement for these people, let alone farming. And it was also pretty small for that number of people. So it is less than 2 miles long. It's about 650 yards wide, so it's very small. So there were also no shelters there to speak of. It's literally an uninhabited island in the middle of a river. And the settlers, and actually I'm just going to call them prisoners because let's just call it what it is. Like, they didn't want to settle there. They get there. There's no shelters, just trees that they're expected to use to build themselves cover with. Again, they are in fucking Siberia. But to the shock and surprise of absolutely no one, the officials in Tomsk had failed to send them with any tools to do this with. They are sent there with nothing. So now...
Which, like, Russian people are tough, but, like, not that tough.
Yeah, you're sending them to an uninhabited island, no tools, no pre-existing shelter, in Siberian spring, which is basically Siberian
Still
winter.
Yeah.
It's so dumb. So here they are on this snowy island. Again, they're in fucking Siberia. So the prisoners, they had to settle basically for sleeping in the open in the driving snow that first night because there's just no way for them to provide themselves lumber to build anything for warmth or cover that first night. And so the first night that they're there, another 295 of the prisoners die from exposure to the elements. So we're at a death count of about 330 at this point. And baby, it's just getting worse. So one thing to mention about the people that had been sent to Cannibal Island is that nearly all of them had been city dwellers. Again, they had been arrested in the street simply for not having their passport on them. So, like, they weren't even necessarily dissident of the regime. They just fell victim to that law enforcement trying to fill these quotas. So, all that being said, they were not people who had any sort of survivalist or wilderness experience. Again, they were city dwellers. And because they hadn't need to have that skill set, they realized very quickly that this is a problem because none of them know how to survive in the elements. So on the journey to this island, the prisoners, they are supplied with bread each day to keep them alive. They get like a little hunk of bread. However, upon reaching the island, the guards could apparently no longer be fucked to turn the flour that they had been given in Tomsk into bread anymore. So instead what they do is they give each person 200 grams of raw flour a day as sustenance. And then they hop back on their boat, sail over to the opposite riverbank, chilling, well-fed in their warm boats. So I think we can see how we're going to get to the conclusion of Cannibal Island here, because, again, there's nothing on this island. They have no way to prepare this flour and make it into food. They're just being given raw flour.
Well, and it's like, and if you eat raw flour, you can get salmonella from it.
Yeah, well, and...
Like, raw flour has a higher chance of giving you salmonella than eggs do.
Well, guess what? It's even worse than that, though, because in desperation, a lot of these prisoners, they start to mix the flour with river water, which then leads to an outbreak of dysentery among the population. And this is only day 2 that this is happening. So people are dying from exposure. They're now dying of dysentery because they're getting that from the river water that they're mixing with the flour on top of, sure, probably salmonella as well. It's just a fucking shitstorm. So from this point, things, it doesn't seem like it could get worse, but things just get worse from here. So I'm going to issue your trigger warning. Like, here it is, guys. It's getting worse, and just be prepared for it. So just 4 days after arriving on this island, things began to spiral even more out of control. So there are freezing rains happening nightly, which were killing people just based off of exposure alone. And those that did manage to build themselves a fire would often fall asleep too close to the fire, and then they would just be burned to death. Like, this was a frequent occurrence. So on top of that, the guards, since that initial, handing out of the raw flour, they had not returned from their side of the riverbank to distribute any more flour. So this prompts actually some of the prisoners that still had like their faculties about them to stage a protest and a riot. And this is when the guards decide they're going to come back over and check and see what all the hubbub's about. Of course there could be nothing wrong. There's not an island of 5,000 people with no food or resources. This is, it's perfectly fine. Everything's fine. So they get to the island, and upon reaching the island, they're like, yep, shit, they're rioting. So they come to an agreement with the prisoners there that they would reinstate the flour rations, but they wouldn't be doing it on a person-to-person basis like they had before. They told the prisoners that they had to form into basically 150-person brigades, and each brigade would have a leader that would be given everyone's rations. That leader would be responsible for then doling it out to their brigade. This was a terrible plan. So on the island, there had already become like this very every man for themselves mentality forming. And so some of the prisoners, when the guards came back to hand out rations, they would go up to the guards, say that, hey, I'm one of the brigade leaders. The guards, of course, don't give a rip. And they're like, okay, buddy, here, sure, here's your flour. Would give them the rations, but spoiler alert, people were not honest. They were in survival mode. So this basically leads to a handful of the prisoners controlling the rationed flour, and the rest of the island inhabitants slowly starving to death. So basically, we're looking at Mad Max right now, but instead of gasoline, they're fighting over raw flour, because that is the only food they're being given. So, rightfully so, in my opinion, people are starting to lose their grip on humanity and are just like fighting to survive. And so at this point, you're probably wondering, like, I was anyway, why the hell did people not just swim across the river and escape? Well, some tried. So there was one man in particular that did manage to swim across the icy water. He makes it to the other side. He was able to escape into the forest. And so he ends up finding one of those collective farms that we mentioned earlier, where people were sent to farm for the Soviet Union. And he actually ends up staying there, and that he stayed there for the rest of his life. It wasn't a long life. It was only a handful of years, but he ends up finding a farm where he at least is provided with food, and he stays there. So others attempted this as well. Often what would happen is they would drown in the water, or they would make it to the other side, end up dying of hypothermia from being inside icy water. And those that did make it to the other side in good enough shape to still make a break for it were then hunted in the forest by the guards, basically for sport. And they basically were just hanging out in their warm ships, being well fed and like picking people off. So escape, really not a feasible option, especially when you're like in the midst of starvation. You would not have the physical, I don't think, energy to swim across the water and then run into the forest and not get shot. So all of this is unfolding, and the guards here, again, truly monsters. They would, like I said, they would hang out on the deck of the ship, and literally, so they could see the island from where their ship was docked, and what they would do is they would sit on the deck of their ship. They would get just fucking shit blasted because they're Russians. They like their vodka, and just they would have a fun game where they would just sail over to the island. They would throw a hunk of bread into the crowd and just like watch people just like descend into chaos, and they would stand on the edge of the ship and just like pick people off like target practice just for funsies. Some of the guards would also trade bread for sex with young female prisoners. It was just bad. Like, they were not good people.
Like, arguably worse than concentration camps, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fucking terrible, because at least, like, at the work camps, sure, you're being treated like garbage, and we know how fucking awful that was, but at least you were given shelter. So you might be dying of starvation or disease, but you're not at least dying from exposure. Like, so basically, literally 1 week after these first barges land on the island, the camp doctors, so there had been doctors aboard with the guards to tend to the people. Obviously, they're not doing a good job, but they discover just a week after landing that the corpses of the dead, they start to notice signs of cannibalism. 2 days after that discovery, another barge shows up carrying an additional 1,000 passengers to the island, carrying no food still. So another 1,000 people show up just to be thrown out into the cold. So by late May, the prisoners, they began to split up into gangs. So the stronger ones, they were stealing what little food the weaker ones had, often killing people over the rations, and still this like was not enough food. So by June, the prisoners began to do the only thing they could to survive, and with all the bodies lying around as a plentiful resource, they simply began to just eat them. So one surviving prisoner stated that, and this was like many years later, about eating human meat, he goes, "No, that's not true. I only ate livers and hearts. It was very simple. Just like a shashlik. I think it's Russian for like a shish kebab. We made skewers from willow branches, cut it into pieces, stuck it on skewers, then roasted it over the campfire. I picked those who were not quite living, but not quite dead yet. It was obvious they were about to go. That in like a day or two, they'd give up. So it was easier for them that way, just now quickly without suffering for another day or two. So they would like pick people that were on the verge of dying and just like end it for them so that the meat was fresh and then cook them. So there's another story that's recounted by a woman whose family actually lived on the banks of the river near this island. So one night, this woman was brought into her family's home when she was a child, and her legs were wrapped up in these rags, and then they're like trying to treat her. They removed the bandages and found that her calves had been entirely cut off as she was living. So the victim told them that they'd cut off her calves on the island and cooked them. So even more disturbing is a story told by another woman who was 13 at the time and was on the island with her family collecting tree bark. And a young woman who'd been sleeping with one of the guards was caught by a hungry mob when she returned to the island. And so people caught the girl, they tied her to a tree, and this gets really gross, they cut off her breasts, her muscles, everything that they could eat, they cut off of her as she was still living. And so when the guard comes back, she is still alive. He did try to save her, but she had just obviously lost too much blood at that point, so she unfortunately passed. This goes on for about a month and a half, and by mid-June, it's like very clear that the experiment had failed. Like there was no redeeming qualities to this. And so the Soviet Union, they quickly cut their losses, and they decide, we're going to end this and send them to a different gulag elsewhere. So over the span of 13 weeks, between 1,500 and 2,000 of these prisoners had died due to starvation, exposure disease, murder, accidental death, yada, yada, you name it. Another 2,000 of those settlers had disappeared and their whereabouts were untraceable. So obviously they're presumed dead and probably were consumed. So the death tolls do include people who either died or disappeared during their transportation to or from the island. So there was a small handful of people that, didn't die on the island, but they died just getting there, which, is terrible as well. So only 2,200 people were left alive out of the roughly 6,000 that were sent to the island. And these survivors, they're quickly shipped upriver to different work camps. So, for example, like that one guy that escaped and went to a collective farm, that's like one of the places they would have been sent to. And then the guards, they were sent back to Tomsk. And the Soviets were like, we really fucked up, and we're trying to bury what had happened there. So one man, he is going to be the small hero of our story. He's like, oh, hell no. His name is Vasily Velishko. So later in that year, in July, he had like been hearing rumors of what had happened on Nazino Island from the locals. So the locals would always say that they could hear screaming and gunshots. They could just like hear awful things happening on this island because it wasn't super far off the riverbank. Like you would be able to hear that shit was going down there. And so this man's hearing all these stories. So what he does is he's like, I'm going to go investigate. And he actually happened to be a communist instructor on like a local collective farm. So he was also very much like in Stalin's butthole, like, but he was going to go investigate. So he arrives to that island in August, and from the riverbank, he like couldn't see really anything out of the ordinary. But once he gets to the island, he finds the remains of what had happened there. And so, without the authorization from his supervisor, he decides to collect all this evidence. And so, he is like interviewing local people and collecting this evidence from the island. And eventually, he submits his report to Moscow. For his troubles and for exposing the for his troubles and for exposing the truth here, he is promptly fired and kicked out of the Communist Party. However, before being buried in the archives, this report is actually read by, thankfully, some good-hearted Soviet official. And so this, what they were calling resettlement program, was declared a huge failure. It had abruptly being replaced with forced labor camps, which is just as fucking terrible. And all the guards actually do end up being jailed. So all the guards present at this experiment went to jail, but only for 12 months in a standard prison, not in a gulag like they would just send people without their passports to. So they really just got a slap in the wrist, basically. So after that initial investigation in late 1933, all of the events at Cannibal Island, aka Nazino Island, they were largely forgotten as they weren't made public. And only a small number of like survivors and government officials and eyewitnesses have ever knew that it had happened, and they weren't not gonna speak up about it because obviously they know Stalin's regime is just gonna fucking off them if they do. Finally, in 1988, at the time of there's like a glasnost policy happening in the Soviet Union, which is basically like a Transparency of Information Act for the Soviet Union. It goes into effect, and then the details of this Nazino Island experiment becomes available to the general public, and it's only then that people start to know what actually happened there and people start to talk about it. So,
well, and wasn't that kind of a result of Chernobyl? Didn't you say 1987?
I believe so. So Chernobyl would have happened, yeah, because it was in the Ukraine, right? So it would have been part of the USSR, and so shortly after that, people are like, we need, freedom of information, and then it came to public light that this had happened, so that's how we know about Cannibal Island today. Yeah, that's my story. So, Stinky Stalin, fuck you, man. That's fucking terrible. That's
one of our fuck yous for the week.
Definitely.
I mean, because I've heard the story before, too. It's just, like, interesting that it went on for so long. That they made the choices that they made. Because it's like, you would think that with as big as the USSR was, that they would have put them somewhere more feasible, like Ukraine, or, somewhere more Eastern, or Western to them, but Eastern European. That was like an actual fertile growing ground rather than just bumfuck middle of Siberia, where...
It really seems to me like they might have said that it was an effort to, like, do farming or whatever, but it seems more just like a cruel experiment in what would happen if you, like, tried to settle a land like that. I don't think that there was probably ever any real assumption that these people would be able to fend for themselves and survive.
Right.
Because they give them absolutely nothing to do that with.
Yeah, no tools, no nothing. Well, and then it's like, even if you do have some tools and you're like, okay, we're creating this power disparity where some people have control and some people don't. You're also dropping a massive amount of people. It's not like it was 25 people. It was, 7,000 people?
Yeah, so 6,000 people total, and of that, only 2,200 of them survived.
Yeah.
A lot of them actually did end up dying, like, after leaving the island just due to, like, injury sustained and things like that, but I didn't have a full count of that. So if I had to guess, probably only about 1,500 people actually survived that.
So that leads me to the question, if you were on Cannibal Island, would you eat a person?
Honestly, I'm a soft bitch. I probably would have died from exposure the first night and then be eaten myself, so I don't know.
I probably would.
if it was, like, down to my survival and someone's like, here's a shish kebab, but it's made of human calf meat, I'd be like, okay, I have to do it.
Yeah. Well, it's also not like, okay, you know, help might be on the way soon. It's like you have no idea of how long you're going to be there for.
Well, and the guards and doctors that are there to provide you assistance and food are just shooting you off the side of their ship. So, that, like, obviously, you're just, you know that you're not in for a good time.
Yeah. So it's like all hope was kind of lost. But yeah, it's just like amazing how quickly humans devolve back into ape men when put in situations like that. Like, we really do go feral quick.
Yep.
And these were like city people. It's not like you were taking some country bumpkins out. Like,
it's not like you had Bear Grylls.
Yeah, no. Well, that, and it's like people with less like social graces. Like, these were people that were like accustomed to being in highly social situations, and they went from like, not like socialites, but like they interact with people more, and like you would think that they'd be more humane towards other people, but no, they just straight up went straight to cannibalism. Like, first night, second night.
Yeah, it was not good. And then, of course, like, even after this, they were like, oh shit, we fucked up and have to cover it up. They were just like, you know what, this sucked, but let's just have a bunch of forced labor camps in the USSR now. And still, and like, this all happened before World War II. And I wonder if we had known about it, like the Allied powers had known about it, if they would have still, like, been as willing to work with them. But
I feel like the Allied powers were just looking for something to take out Germany. They really sold their soul to Stalin on that one.
For sure. It's terror time. Baby, it's terror time. Let's find out what's gonna happen this week.
Okay. So, I have the Nine of Swords reversed, which is, like, this is, like, hopelessness. This is, like, depression. Like, you're losing sleep over something. There is the Eight of Cups reversed, which is, like, withdraw. This is, like, kind of running away from your problems. See, little guys, he's going away. Not really facing them head on. You're looking away. Hold on. I already forgot. Because I pulled them while you were talking. Because I want to be ready. Because I got Portillo's too. This is the Ace of Cups reversed. This is like dissatisfaction. This is neglect. So there's something that's like causing you depression. Maybe you're neglecting yourself. You're not facing your problems head on. You're kind of in an unfortunate series of events. The Wheel of Fortune reversed. So this is the Knight of Cups reversed. This is you have some unrealistic expectations. And then there is the Eight of Swords, which is like, this is like you'll be freed from this sort of situation. Let me see one more card. Yeah, so you'll become more successful after that. You just have to get through this period of kind of like depression, kind of resistance, running away from your problems before you can go on to be successful. So that is a tarot reading for this week.
Well, sweet. Well, on that note, the FUs for the week. Jojo, Little Dick, Stinky Stalin, for sure.
The U.S. government for keeping lepers locked up for so long, even though it's easily cured by antibiotics.
Yes, that as well. And I don't have any personal beef this week, so...
I'm trying to think if I have any personal beef. I was just kind of busy, so I don't really have any personal... I don't know. I had
that's
a pretty,
good.
like...
That's good that we don't have personal beef this week, so...
Yeah.
We just have the two
growing.
FUs. We're growing. We love a little bit of personal growth. We are enlightened women this week. Words of wisdom.
Peace.
We are choosing peace. That's going to be our words of wisdom this week. Choose peace. There you go.
Choose peace. Don't choose to dump what you don't like on an island.
Yes. Yeah. Don't do that.
I will issue a fuck you just because. So I was also traveling on top of being in the hospital this week. And so I was listening to different YouTube videos that were like longer, but a lot of them I kind of got on a anti-Rachel Hollis kick. So fuck you to Rachel Hollis, because they're just going through like her whole culture of like toxic positivity. This doesn't have anything to do with anything, but we'll just issue that as a fuck you as well, for no particular reason, just that I was listening to kind of the old beef and newer beef and
Yeah.
I don't know. I just hate everything like that, like the like pyramid schemes and stuff that like really just prey on people who are looking for guidance, and instead of offering genuine, kind, compassionate guidance, you sell it as a product and manipulate people out of their money. And like some of her things were thousands of dollars for like the lowest ticket. Some of her conferences and shit.
I have an FU as well. Speaking of YouTube, Girl Defined. If you're
F them
unfamiliar
always.
with Girl Defined, F them always. They are so awful. And they have
They are
these
trash.
conferences, and like they're very well intended conferences. They're like basically fundy Christian women, which is fine, but they also like to like trash on other Christian YouTubers for not being like Christian enough, or for having pro,
Like God is gray.
yeah, and then they have like a very anti-LGBT stance, and I'm pretty sure that one of their husbands is a closeted man, and he is like repressing that. So
I think both of them are.
probably so, yeah. I wonder if maybe
Well,
their husbands have like a little thing on the side together.
I wonder. But also it's like, oh my God. It's like Abby Shapiro.
Oh,
Her husband is the same
Abby.
way. Candace Owens' husband is the same way, where they're just like, they're definitely, I mean, and you can be an effeminate man, and I'm like, you know what, that's fine. But they are, because of the way that they act and like their values, I'm just going to go ahead and, you know, shame them for probably being closeted.
Yeah.
And then using their internalized homophobia to rage against LGBTQ people just because of their own feelings. So that's not right.
Right. So, okay. So we've got our FUs. So then our words of wisdom are, choose peace unless you're raging against fundy Christians on YouTube. And
Somebody's got to fight the good fight.
somebody's got to fight the good fight. Also, DM
The Catholic
us.
Church.
Yeah, DM us your Catholic trauma and or your religious trauma. We would love to hear it. And other than that, I'm going to wrap it up because I have Big Brother on tonight. If anyone else watches Big Brother, definitely DM me. I love to talk about Big Brother. But yeah, on that note, you can find all of our info in the description. I'm going to try to find that gentleman on TikTok I was talking about. I will link him as well. I will not be linking Girl Defined. I will not be linking Classically Abby. And if you want to go and on their channels and just leave them poop emojis in their comments, because that's how I think of them, do it. I approve of that message. Anything else?
No, that's it.
All right, guys. Thanks so much for listening. We will see you next week. Have a good one. Open some mini brands. Bye.
Bye.